The state of Neovim, the status of Neovim. There's Neovim corporate headquarters. Last year, I gave a talk on how Neovim should operate. In 2019 in Japan, I gave a talk on why Neovim exists and why it made the choices it did, and like what those choices should be going forward. And now this talk examines the progress since last year, which is when I kind of like outlined some ideas for like harnessing the energy and the popularity of the project that has happened in the last year. And I think actually like probably an effective anecdote, like sort of hinting at how much has changed in the last almost 9 years, and the current momentum of the project is a true story. I was in a kind of a somewhat important meeting with Amazon leadership in Seattle a few weeks ago, and at the end of the meeting, my manager's manager saw a sticker on my laptop and said, "Oh, Neovim, you use that? I love that." And I said, "Yeah, I do use it." And my takeaways from this interaction was, number one, I probably shouldn't be so quick to dismiss getting a face tattoo of the Neovim logo, so that it's like more obvious that I'm closely involved with the project. Number two, it's cool that Amazon leadership is technical enough to use projects like Neovim. And number three, Neovim is way more popular, and it's finding than I ever expected, and it's finding its ways into nooks and crannies that I did not expect, and probably we're going to be peaking, I would say, in the next year or two in popularity, because I don't know how we can keep doubling users every year. It's just a modal text editor. So yeah, that's a hint at the current state of Neovim. I'm Justin Keys online on Twitter and GitHub. I go by the handle of Justin MK. I've been a Neovim core maintainer since almost the beginning. I still remember even before Neovim started, talking with Tiago on Reddit and sort of like talking about like, potential strategies for like getting this off the ground. That to this day, the sort of the README text that you see in the Neovim repo has been almost unchanged from those conversations that we had on Reddit at the end of 2013. And it's surprising that things haven't really had to change that much from those initial conversations, despite the fact that we are actually continuously, like regularly re-examining stuff. My favorite model for thinking about how the project operates is simulated annealing, and like a key part of simulated annealing is that there's cooldown phases. So like even though there's like really chaotic like evolutionary phases, there's also sort of like a cool down stage, and that's kind of where like the signal is drawn out of the noise of the chaos. And so this is re-examining things is important for the project, and for us to sort of like continue to shape like a coherent direction for the project, instead of just having like a big grab bag of features. And So the topics of this talk are the purpose, the progress, and the plan. So we are again going to briefly re-examine the why question, which was much more deeply examined in 2019, but we always want to re-examine like at least once a year. Having a conference for the text editor is a good place, is a good mechanism for inducing that sort of re-examination. And then we'll talk about like tangible stuff, like what did we actually accomplish? Did the ideas and the plans from last year, like how did they work out? How did they manifest? And then we'll briefly, hopefully, have enough time to talk about the plan. But as you know, it's hard for me to fit these things. So the purpose, like the charter page has like sort of like a more specific list of like project goals, but really the elevator pitch for the project is this mantra: extensible, usable Vim, which you see plastered in various places on the website. Vim focused on extensibility and usability. On GitHub, hyper-extensible Vim-based text editor actually swap those, but the mantra is these three sort of central ideas: extensible, usable, Vim. All three of those like kind of have equal weight, and the reason that I want to harp on this is because it seems like sometimes this is forgotten, especially in like discussions about like project direction that happen in PRs and things like that. And that picture at the bottom there that you see is kind of like a science fiction like rendering of like some sort of vehicle or something harvesting the useful minerals from an asteroid. Forking Vim is basically like asteroid mining. I really like this analogy. Bringing the raw material, like there's 4 ways that you can get useful things out of an asteroid. There's 4 approaches, and we're kind of using like all of those approaches in Neovim. Number 2, bringing back the raw material is kind of analogous to forking, and we did that. Sending patches upstream is like doing the manufacturing on the asteroid itself, or somewhere in space, and processing stuff on site and then getting products out of it. That's like the API, and transporting the asteroid physically back to Earth. That's pretty much that's very has obvious parallels to embedding, and these are the core activities of the Neovim project. But then returning to like the purpose, taking away focusing on the Vim part of the mantra, like one of the main purposes is actually to preserve like the useful parts of Vim. So when people just sort of like start, I've seen like some more like cavalier talk about we don't need this old stuff like here and there, like Vim script sucks, or like Vim regular expressions, why do we need those? Well, I mean, this is one of the 3 pillars of the project, and if we take that away and we just sort of like forget about it, then we need to really like re-examine like actually what again is the goal, what's the direction. I think that, and I made the case for why we should preserve the Vim parts, the useful parts of Vim in 2019. So I won't go into that here, but the audience of Neovim is like narrower than Vim and VS Code themselves, which both seem to try to target the entire universe. Vim in particular targets the entire universe in a clumsy way. You have Easy Vim, which is actually like, it's kind of like oxymoron, but it tries to target people who don't want a modal text editor, which doesn't really make any sense. And then also mention again, referring back to this slide from 2019, just the amount of useful content under the ugly surface area of legacy is it's actually captured in something called the Lindy effect, which is on Wikipedia, and it's a description of the idea that like things that are really old are probably going to exist even longer than things that just started to exist. So, and the reason for this tends to be like that they actually have like a lot of value. So I didn't know about this term in 2019, but like I went to great lengths to sort of like map it out and describe it, and it's cool that actually that there's a name for it. So at Neovim project, we're targeting the latter half of this somewhat famous quote, like the tool is kind of like shaping us. We chose to do this. If we're gonna make the tool into something else, then we kind of like the first question is like, well, what's the point? And so like this is an intentional constraint. It's intentional that we're not like in the core project focusing on making an integrated experience, because that tends to have these sort of treadmill tasks. Treadmill tasks are tasks like, you know, keeping up with every random language server's configuration. That's a treadmill. It's a lot of work. It's a huge distraction, and it takes away from actually all the other infinite work that we have to do on actually just making a text editor in the form of this. I think of it as a towel from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it's just like this. It's really simple and minimalistic, but super versatile multi-tool that you can take with you in all different sorts of contexts. And in fact, like when I hear people talking about like, you know, having like a fully integrated out of the box experience, this is so confusing to me anyways, because you can combine Neovim with VS Code today. This works well. I use it all the time at work. Just install this plugin that's linked here. And this was one of the original purposes that Neovim even existed. I mean, the reason I got excited about the project at the end of 2013 was because I wanted to embed it in Atom. But instead of Atom, now we have VS Code. And whatever the next wave is, we will continue to surf on those waves. Like that's the power of having a hosted model that's flexible and can work in many different contexts. So directly answering just this, having the modesty to directly re-examine this question, like just from scratch, we addressed the original milestones in 2016, job controlled terminal, but so do we even need to exist anymore? What's the point? I still see a lot of like topics that interest me personally, and that's what keeps bringing me back to working on the project, like things that interest me. Everyone that's working on the project, they have things that personally interest them. The decoupled UI is something that's not really addressed anywhere else. I think there's still a lot of interesting things that are going to come out of that, and including Neovim. Neovim's own TUI will be using the decoupled UI, and that's sort of like analogous to a compiler being a self-hosted compiler. Will be a self-hosted UI. And then just the huge Cambrian explosion of Lua plugins that we've seen in the last year or two. I'm seeing like real concrete like outcomes from that. Like for example, the Git signs Lua plugin, which is written fully in Lua for Neovim by Lewis. That's the best in class Git signs plugin for Vim or Neovim, period. So like this is an example of where like this sort of like simulated annealing process is generating like actual tangible useful results. And then personally, you know, I like having a respite from Vim's script. Like I actually like, I like the flexibility of Vim and Emacs, like, but I want like a language that isn't working against me, isn't obsessed with syntax, new forms of syntax. I just want a language that is like small, minimal, and actually just like kind of just like has really consistent mechanisms. So Lua is kind of like an alternative there, and it kind of like fills that gap for me. And in terms of like core development, the Neovim development model continues to yield like real useful editor features instead of just syntax obsessed language development. We're actually yielding like real features, status column, zero command height, things like that. It seems that people like actually prefer to work in this code base instead of the Vim code base. This was all part of the original purpose of Neovim, and it continues to be relevant today. And then finally, the story for Tree Sitter is still like totally just like early days, and it's like looking really promising. And I'm excited to see what comes out of that. But then also, again, like self-examination. What about all these other like super amazing text editors? Well, I think that like they're all converging on the same idea. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Towel, the minimal multi-tool, we're all converging on this idea. So I actually don't care at all which one gets there first or optimally. Like they're all part of the simulated annealing process where like different sorts of like chemical reactions are happening, and then we're converging on the North Star. VS Code and Eclipse Thea and JetBrains Fleet are kind of going in that direction from a different angle, but it's not quite the same thing. And I would actually propose that like a single like way of calibrating whether something is an IDE or a text editor, because some people like I think fumble trying to figure out like where do you draw the line. I think it might be interesting to think about the line being drawn as like, if you can download the source of the project and build it from source in 5 to 10 minutes, then you could probably call that a text editor. If it can't do that, if it takes like hours or like a server farm, then it's probably an IDE. So next stage of the talk is talking about like concrete progress in the last year. This is always a really fun slide. Our GitHub downloads, which is just people clicking on the release page, or maybe bots also clicking down on the release page. I don't know how GitHub calculates those downloads, but it's now at 2.3 million. A year ago, it was at 170K, so it's more than doubled. So there's a clear like sort of exponential curve there. Homebrew is not so exponential, but it's still a healthy growth. 476,000 downloads roughly, or installs per year versus 300,000 per year last year. The Stack Overflow survey, we were voted the most loved text editor or IDE 2 years in a row. And something interesting also, if you dig into the raw numbers on the Stack Overflow survey, you can see actually that the number of votes on that section for Neovim increased year over year, and the absolute number of votes for Vim actually decreased by about 10 or so percent, 10, 15% year over year. So I don't know what's going on there, but it's interesting to see all these signals sort of like continuing to kind of like hint that like this project is relevant. And on Reddit, 44,000 members. This is interesting because in 2014, when there was no Neovim subreddit, the Vim subreddit only had 30,000 total members, and it's now tripled to or like quintupled to 150,000 members. So this flies in the face of all the people that were like grumbling and nonstop, and you'll still find them on Hacker News, saying that like Neovim splits the community and it will divide the resources. Well, actually, it turns out this is not a zero-sum calculation, because if you significantly multiply the amount of excitement around modal editing and the Vim sort of like code base, and you multiply the activity and the mind share around that, and you just get a bunch more developers in general working on both projects, then actually you gained a lot. And it turns out that's what happened. And I think Neovim deserves probably a good amount of credit for that. And the other interesting thing that kind of like is a counter signal to like, and also confirms something that I intuited years ago on the Vim dev mailing list, but something that Bram admonished me for it, but something I said was, and I still have this position, which is like, users that are not really actively using any of the features of your product that were made in the last 10 or 20 years, they don't count. They're useless. It doesn't matter if they like accidentally open Vim to edit a git commit message. They don't care if it's Nano or Vim or whatever. They're not real users. They're not actually moving the needle on anything at all. They're not increasing the development activity. They're not increasing the mind share or the buzz. They're not filing bug reports. They're nothing. They're useless. And you can kind of, this is like a perfect example of it. The Vim subreddit has 3 times as many members, but only there's only like 178 of them are actually like active, whereas there's actually more active users in the Neovim subreddit, and it only has 1/3 of the total membership size. So this is another signal also that actual like enthusiasts of the Vim editing model are, a lot of them are using Neovim, and I'm experiencing this even like in like Slack channels at work. You probably run into this where it's like, where are all these Neovim users coming from? Does anyone actually use Vim anymore? It's amazing to see. It's shocking. But and then again, in terms of like modest self-examination, let's talk about the risks. The risks that I see are, too much activity not being channeled in like a useful way. Something Fred Brooks called conceptual integrity. You need that sort of like approximately single human consciousness, like an architect sort of like is like the narrow waist or the conduit through which like concepts are flowing. If we can't control that and we just get a huge Walmart bargain bin of features that don't work well together, then we're going to become less relevant and we'll sort of like suffocate under our own weight. And another risk is that like Vim patches are still not like just really horizontally distributed at all. We're very dependent on one person to do it, who has been amazing, but it's definitely a risk. And then our Windows support still, we need like some Windows developers like sort of taking time and care to make sure that things work well on Windows. Though we have had some help from 3N, I want to give him a call out. And the final risk is that like important plugins, if they decide not to support Neovim, then that's a big risk. But that risk is actually dwindling. I never expected this. 2 years ago, this wasn't even a remote possibility to me. I thought that plugins like we would be dependent on VimScript for a long time for a lot of important plugins, but this risk is sort of shrinking. But I think that Vim Fugitive is a good example of like a plugin that like I would seriously miss if it didn't support Neovim. So so when Vim sort of like put the flag in the ground for Vim 9 script, that was when we actually just had something that we had like sort of been like moving towards but did not like officially declare, was that actually we're just going to go fully towards Lua. This made the decision really easy, and it has yielded this extreme popularity which we've been talking about so far. I think also the popularity, is definitely largely due to YouTube personalities like TJ and Primogen and the built-in LSP. The just works model of Lua plugins in Vim, that should not be taken for granted. That took a lot of careful work, most of it by Bjorn. And then Lua itself deserves credit for the explosion here. Lua is the 4th fastest growing language on GitHub. It's 10 times more popular than VimScript, and I think it deserves credit. It has that economy of concepts. It has that structural integrity that I referred to earlier. The concepts are composable, like closures work the same everywhere. Functions, You can pass them all around. And of course, tables are ubiquitous, and then coroutines. It has covered like a lot of these concepts that, like in recent articles by these PL people, they're looking at these things like coroutines and modules. I might have missed the point of this blog post, but to me, it seems like this compares favorably to Lua. Lua has mature answers for some of these stories that are called out as like the next big thing for programming languages to take on. So concrete features here's a list of concrete features that we delivered in 2022. In particular, one that I think is exemplary for the Neovim extensibility story, and that part of our mantra is UI attached. The Vim.ui attaches the Lua interface to the UI protocol that RPC plugins have had access to for years. This is now also opened up, just like we exposed libuv, just like we exposed Vim itself to plugins. Now UI events are exposed to in-process Lua plugins, and it didn't take long for Folky to leverage this in this very interesting plugin called Noise.nvim, where it just replaces like every UI component that's exposed by the UI protocol. File type.lua was really deep performance work. Thanks to Christian and others for working on that. Diagnostics by G. Panders, Spellsitter by Lewis, and Vigu, and clickable status line, and then semantic highlighting for LSP just landed on master, and then tree sort of MDuck. Text editor as a platform, I talked about this in 2019. The OS failed, so it's up to the browser to be the GUI OS, and it's up to text editors to be the OS in your terminal. Work that we've done in 2022 towards that is the Vim.ui namespace. We continue to develop that so that plugins can override core UI functionality of the text editor. And Vim.secure is a way of supporting workspace local settings, and potentially maybe we might introduce the project concept around that at some point in the future. The funding for Neovim is zero overhead. It's used only to fund developers working full-time for at least a month on the project. We funded over 10 developers like this since 2014. And the 2022 list of features that was delivered from funding is the Vim 9 script to Lua transpiler. That's going to be that we're looking at that as a way to continue pulling upstream work from Vim, in particular test coverage and runtime plugins. So that's important work. And then Bjorn has been doing some really deep and careful work on performance, low-level performance, RPC allocations, and is also working on an advanced form of virtual text. FAMU fully made the incremental command preview, opened that up to be extensible to plugins, so plugins can now provide previewable commands as you type for any commands. And clickable status line, global status line. So, and progress on TreeSitter itself, we don't run TreeSitter, but it's an important dependency of ours, and it's also something that we look at carefully because it kind of like we've kind of bet the farm on it in some sense. It's now part of Emacs. GitHub and SourceGraph and are using it. Other companies like Amazon use it. And I think Vim will end up using it too, despite their best efforts to avoid it. And now also some upstream contributors are showing great interest in upstreaming the innovations by Christian and others for Neovim tree sitter around the using it for indentation and folding concepts. So how well did we do at channeling the energy since last year when we kind of like speculated on a strategy for doing this? We're no longer a small group anymore, so it's harder to correct errors, but at least as a big group, if we can channel energy, then that can be a big advantage of being a big group if you are able to usefully channel the energy. And you do this by documentation. So we've inlined a lot of documentation, the Lua documentation, the love documentation, Nanote's Lua guide, but then also we now have a parser for VimDoc. This is a big deal because it buys us a huge amount of time. We no longer have to answer the question of, oh, should we move to Markdown for documentation? We don't really have to answer that question right now because instead of a shitty old awk script, we now have Lua plus tree sitter that understands the structure of the document, gives us like a useful AST, and that means that we can generate really nice looking HTML, and we can give that AST information to Neovim itself. So here's a before and after view of our HTML docs. And now, because that shitty awk script is gone, we got contributions from other people. Christian added the ability to have annotated code blocks, so now we get syntax highlighting injected into the help documents. And this works even in the terminal, even in the editor, if you enable tree sitter on help documents. Progress on automation. Dundargok is the Highlander of automation work and old but very important refactoring work of Neovim. We now have fully automated code formatting enforced by CI and can also be used locally so that you don't ever have to think about formatting. Neovim contributors do not think about formatting anymore. It's like working on a Go code base. Dundargok also contributed a really cool improvement to the Vim patch script, which makes the patches that it generates much more useful because it aligns the formatting of the project from Vim to Neovim formatting. So now we get like much more useful diffs generated. We also now have multiple people that can cut releases. So this is a solved problem. We no longer have that single point of failure. Continuing the move, the simulated annealing analogy, the moving fast. This was part of our strategy that I outlined in the talk last year. The general idea is like the gnomes from South Park. You collect underpants, which is like chaos. You do something, mutatis mutandis, like something happens, and then you get something good out of it at the end. So actually, the chaos is step 2, I think. But are we moving too fast? I'm seeing now like posts on Reddit about like people getting overwhelmed because of the pace of changes, and this is kind of an open question. Actually, it's like an open backwards compatibility question. I don't have much to say there. Another part of our strategy last year was like we would have like a model for like deprecating stuff in an orderly fashion, and so we introduced vim.deprecate for that, and we're also like writing a formal guideline for like Lua API compatibility, which will be analogous but not exactly the same as the RPC API contract. So this is like kind of a rough idea of like the progress that we made since last year's talk. Like we didn't get around to fully implementing the remote TUI, and there's some open questions about like where the shape of the standard library, the Lewis stdlib API. So going forward, like the strategy and the plan, I hope, is to combine the streams, to channel the energy into like a narrow waist by just writing more things down, having clearer guidelines. I think I'm seeing very clearly that like there's a lot of confusion in our contributions and our PR discussions about like what kind of names should be used for APIs, when should we use new modules. So the challenge here is to like have clear guidelines to answer these questions and to herd the cats. This is kind of like my feeling when I see like a lot of the concepts that we have in our system. Like we control the Neovim system. We don't control everything outside of Neovim, but we control the system inside the universe of Neovim. So there's not really an excuse for us to have like multiple similar yet slightly different concepts. Like it doesn't need to be that way. We just need to write down the guidelines. And another part of our plan is like I think now that we kind of have like we have a path forward, like a clear path for like how documentation is going to look and like what our documentation practices are. Like it's all like the help system is going to be like the source of truth. We're probably going to get rid of the wiki. We're not going to have like these, random pages on the website, and we're not going to have random README files everywhere. So we've established that, and then the next step I think is to build out the Lewis to the. I think that's what the next 12 months really. That's what I'm going to be really thinking about and working on. And in general, the idea is to scale, just continue scaling. Like the documentation strategy is like a key part of this. How do you scale like a bunch of humans, which are like AIs that you don't really control? It's got to be through documentation and clear guidelines and sort of like an ownership structure. And we've started to do that. We have like auto labeling of PRs, and we have some code ownership files defined. And then like also just continuing like spending time thinking about like economy of concepts and because I'm making the case for that. I've been having a hard time actually convincing people that this matters, but I think it has a direct effect on discoverability and usability, which is one of the 3 core themes of our mantra, of our project goal. I think that's mostly it. Yeah. The other big concrete idea is the remote TUI. I think is exciting because it's analogous to a self-hosted compiler.